Hey, we're very excited to have this gentleman in our. We've been wanting to have him on for over a year, and he's a member. It's former Baltimore policeman Michael Wood is with us. Michael, how are you?
Great. Glad to be here with you.
First of all, you
Jimmy.
don't look old enough to be a retired cop.
I
By the
know,
way,
I
what are you?
know.
Are you aging backwards?
The Benjamin Button joke again.
Oh, have people made that joke?
Yeah, I've heard it before.
Oh, no kidding.
So, no, I'm not.
Actually, that's one of
regressing
the
in
few
age.
movies I've seen. I haven't seen many movies. That's one of them I've actually seen.
So-
It was sad at the end.
I am 36. So
You're 36 now.
I was old enough to do all those things that
Okay.
we know I've done.
So now you were a Baltimore cop for 11 years, and you saw a lot of messed up stuff. And then the Freddie Gray thing happened, and did that make you decide to start talking more? Is that what it was?
Yeah, I mean, that was the essential aspect. Was I think I had that wall up to that distance that it wasn't my people. It wasn't the people I was around. It was this distant thing that was happening in Cleveland or happening in Atlanta. It wasn't going to happen in this where I was, where it was a majority black department with a black commissioner and a black mayor and a black president. I mean, this wasn't going to happen in Baltimore. And then it happened in Baltimore. And I saw the unions and the police all stand up saying, we didn't do anything wrong. And it was like, wait. You put a grown man in a metal box, you kill him, and then somehow we're not, there's no scenario where we're not responsible. So if you guys are going to play this game where we have no accountability whatsoever, even if it goes this far, then I'm just going to start talking about everything that I've seen and participated in. And if I get in trouble for that or whatever, we're going to shine light because this has gone too far.
So when you say you're going to start talking about the things that you've seen and publicly, you started tweeting things.
Yeah, I just started tweeting, and I guess I was kind of venting. I was pissed. I was genuinely pissed that representatives of the FOP that I'm a member of.
The FOP is the union, the
Right.
Cop Fraternal Order of Police.
Right. So the president of this union that I'm a member of was representing peace and justice in that manner, and I said, "Fuck that."
So what is it about, just very quickly, what is it about police union bosses that they're fucking maniacs?
Yeah. It's
Right? I know, I have friends, like, now let me set the table. Now, you know this because you listen to the show, but I come from a long line of cops, right? My grandfather was a cop. My dad was a cop. My oldest brother was a cop. Some of my best friends in Chicago are cops. So when I talk about cops being assholes, I know what I'm talking about, right? And by the way, when I say assholes, I don't mean to me. They're very nice guys to me, to their wives, to the Little League, to that. I'm just talking about when they get on the job. And they tell me stories. And most of them are racists, right? And there's varying degrees of racism, but they all have it. And so when this first started to come up, I started to be an on-air host for the Young Turks, the world's largest online news show. And this would come up. They like to do stories on the Young Turks about police brutality. And so I would start just to comment from my experience, from my life. And they were operating under the assumption of bad apple. It's a bad apple. It's a bad apple. Every time there was, and I'm like, well, how many of these videos do you have to see if you guys are going to start believing me that most police officers are a half turn of the screw away from being criminals, if not already? They're pretty much criminal organizations in the same sense. So I would say things like that, and I would get reactions like, whoa, Jimmy, how can you say that? And I'm like, well, firsthand knowledge. What are you talking about? How can I say that? Firsthand. My neighborhood was all cops and firemen because they had a rule in Chicago that if you work for the city, you had to live in the city. Now in Los Angeles, cops can drive in from Simi Valley to Compton and be a cop there, which is a horrible idea. But in Chicago, you had to live in the city. That was a good thing. So all my neighbors were cops or firemen or criminals. All drug dealers, right? That was my neighborhood. My best friends were drug dealers. All their best friends are cops. And so I know what I'm talking about. And I'll just say one more caveat before we get more into this, is that I understand that there's a certain mentality of people who are attracted to police work, right? And we need those people. And I don't want to denigrate those people. I remember there a long time ago, probably 15 or 20 years ago, there was a big scandal in the Navy when some video came out about how they were hazing young officers. And they were hazing them, right? And they were like, "Can you believe what they said to these women?" And I was like, "Yeah, these are trained killers. We're training them to kill people, and now you want them to fucking also be a gentleman?" And everybody said, "No, you can't have we need those people to be like that. We can't have a bunch of Phil Donahues out there fighting our wars for us, trying to talk to people on the battlefield. Hey, can we work this out?" So I'm saying we need those type of people, but we need to keep them on a short leash. And that's not what's happening in America right now. So would you agree with any of that?
I agree with all of that, with a little bit of nuance about where you live.
Okay.
But with the entire mentality, I mean, we can't deny that in my case, I chose to be a police officer for the adrenaline rush. It is sure there's an element and a factor of doing good and that you're the good guy, but for me it was the rush. I wanted the chase. I wanted to go after people. I kind of alluded to hunting, but it wasn't so much hunting because I didn't want to actually hurt them. It was like I was an outside linebacker, so I wanted the blitz and I wanted to get the quarterback, and I didn't want to hurt him because I kind of wanted him to get up so we could play again. And those are the kind of realizations that I made too. And when you talk about the military, so I went into the Marine Corps when I was.
Sorry, go ahead. It's 9 o'clock.
I went to the Marine Corps when I was 17.
Holy cow!
So just from a recent trip to Washington D.C., I was looking at all the statues and the memorials and this glorification of war. And it's like, man, that's really fucking sick, because I was a 17-year-old trying to pursue college and a career, and I was poor. So the way that I had to do that was to go in and be a trained killer at 17. And then I do that for 4 years. I was in a fast team and an elite SWAT team. And I come back and go right into the police department. And it takes you a while to realize what has transpired in that manipulation.
What had transpired?
I became a servant of what I grew up opposing, the oligarchy, the dictatorship. I was carrying out the things that I thought were wrong.
Wow. And so, and it was the Freddie Gray moment that was your come to Jesus moment.
I mean, I should have had them many more times. But that was just seemed to be the broken straw, because Tamir Rice's murder just broke me down emotionally. And I couldn't believe that the nation as a whole, I couldn't believe that the citizens of Cleveland didn't burn that bitch down after that.
Either.
I can't fathom how that didn't happen.
What does it take? So what do other cops, the Cleveland Police Department defends that shooting, and so does the police union chief, right? They defend that. In fact, they even said disparaging thing about the mother. So what do the majority of cops is the majority of cops when they watch that? Is there a majority of cops? Is there a typical reaction to that, or is it like half of them are on the side of the police union, or half of them? How would you break it down?
I think in policing and the military, you kind of have a bit of a Stockholm Syndrome where you're empathizing with the oppressor. So they kind of build up a wall, and you play word games and mind games about what's actually happened. And I think the vast majority do think that's just a bad apple, and we maybe should go after that guy. But they forget, and they totally look past, when Michael Slager killed in South Carolina, the other cop comes and says nothing about him planting.
So you're talking about when the guy was pulled over for a traffic violation, he had warrants, so he started running. Right, but they weren't violent warrants. It was like a child back
Who cares? He's running anyway.
He's running away from the guy. Right. And he shoots him in the back, and just happened to be somebody had a cell phone and caught that, and that's how that came to light. So what you're talking about is then when he shot the guy, the other cop shows up and doesn't do a damn thing about it.
Yeah, and so what that also is going to tell you is that that's not the first time that's occurred. And we all know that, and we've all seen that, but we turn this blind eye to it, and it becomes what I was doing is thinking that guy was an asshole, and screw that guy that just did that, but I never said anything. I didn't do anything about it, because you're going to ruin your career if you do it. But also, I wanted to be a cop. So that's not even on your option of lists of things you can do.
So we'll get into a few specifics. it doesn't give me any joy to talk about these things. Like a lot of people think that Jimmy loves to rant about police brutality and everything. And it was just because of what like it just emotionally takes me over, right? Not in a fun way and not in a way I want to be taken over by it. But the point I try to keep making, and I think now, at least over at the Young Turks, that they've come around, and a lot of other people are coming around, by the way, to that it's not a bad apple, that it's a culture, that even if you become a policeman for the right reasons, you either succumb to that culture or you leave. Right. And so now they're starting to people are starting to get that. It's like, oh, so you could even be a good person, but put inside of a bad culture, you're gonna be acting in accordance with that culture. And and acting in accordance with that is you violate someone's rights, or you turn a blind eye when someone else does it, right? And so you started to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I have no objection. I mean,
so
it's obvious, right?
So just give me a few specifics of some of because you started to tweet out some pretty heavy-duty stuff. I remember reading them, and it was jarring, right? So just can you say a few?
Yeah, but was it jarring? I mean,
well,
I wasn't saying anything that you didn't know. I didn't say anything that wasn't in an NWA song 30 years ago. I didn't say anything that the black community hasn't been screaming out for the last 200 years. I didn't say anything. I was a pretty white boy with a badge, and that's what got the attention.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. Maybe that's why it was shocking to hear a white guy say it. Yeah, I guess you're right. We do hear black guys have been saying that stuff for a long time. And to see you say it, I remember one tweet, it was talking about how it was an innocent woman and you put your boot on her, but it wasn't your boot, but it was your handcuffs.
Well, there was two separate ones. So the first one was the woman that's the first one that sticks out in my head, is I was a young officer and she was walking out of a fried chicken place and a detective was walking in. Well, she was looking at all the cars because the cars park, and what do people do? They look at the cars and the lights are on, and she bumps into him. He's just a plainclothes detective. And she was like, "Excuse you." It was a man bumping into a woman. Mm-hmm. That was kind of reasonable. Mm-hmm. And he just smacked her right across the face and was like, you don't talk to me that way. I'll take your ass to jail, kind of thing. And being a young officer, I just froze and got in my car and got the hell out of here. My philosophy at that time and thinking was that I wasn't here. I didn't see this. So, that's how you have it out.
So there was a cop just went and assaulted a woman for no reason in broad daylight.
It was nighttime, and
he wasn't afraid.
No, I mean, I was. You got to think I'm somebody that he had never even seen or known. I was a nobody, essentially.
So, I mean, I come from a tough neighborhood, right? So I've had cops talk to me that way. And then it's funny when some of my white friends in Hollywood land have it happen to them. And they're like, "You're not going to believe." I'm like, "Yes, I would." What are you talking about? Of course I'm going to. And they can't believe it happened to them. They can't believe it happened in Culver City. They can't believe I had a car full of other white people with me and it still happened. Which it seems like it almost. Now, here's my theory. I have two theories about how this happened.
I have one too, so we'll see how they match up.
Okay, I have two theories, and I would also I want to get to how we get out of this, right? What's the solutions, right? So that's the important part. So my two theories are the drug war. It's a win-win for politicians to be anti-crime, right? To be tough on crime. And drugs in the 80s, it was easy to scare the crap out of people. Crack's coming. It's crack. Oh, my God, crack. What is crack? It's going to put it in your baby's head. Crack. I don't know what it is, but I hear it's horrible, and black people have it. So tougher laws, put people in jail. We now lock up 25% of the world's incarcerated population. We only have 5% of the world's population, the freest country in the world. That's our superior culture. So that it all started with that, and then it got people so afraid. So you got to be afraid of drugs. You got to be afraid of the drug dealer, and we can do whatever we want to them because they're a special, horrible brand of people, and so they don't get constitutional rights. And everybody was like, okay. And so they don't. You seize people's property. You could, without a trial, you just take all their shit. You can break no-knock raid, the whole deal, right? So there's a separate constitution if we say you're a drug dealer. Then 9/11 happened. Now there's a separate constitution. If all they have to do is say you're a terrorist. So now you're a terrorist. So now, and then after 9/11, it all became about the cop safety. Something switched in America. It used to be about the citizen safety. It used to be about they were there to protect and serve you. And now it became my safety first, and then I'll get to your safety. And I say that happened because of 9/11, and even we have directives we've read on this show from the Department of Homeland Security that gave directives to local police departments saying that any groups of people protesting, even peaceful protesters, should be looked at as potential terrorists. So that's what happened. Everybody's a drug. So when you only have one tool, a hammer, every problem's a nail. So that's how we dealt with drugs, even though it's not that problem. So if we can scare you, if the government, the people in power can scare you, they want to keep you scared. It was drugs. Now it's not. Now it's terrorism. So they got you scared. They can take your rights away. And once they take it away, they never get it back. So those are the two big things, I think, that led to the over-militarization of our police force and the over-policing of our societies. What do you say?
Yeah, I think those are all good ideas, but one of the things you're hitting on is when did the cop become what you're saying, like above the citizen? That is a weird thing. I didn't recognize that, but it comes out in the rhetoric right now where they're acting like these cops are in danger and this is a super dangerous job.
It's not.
And it's empirically not dangerous.
Yes.
If you want to treat somebody as a hero because of the danger of their job, well, then go to West Virginia and talk to some coal miners and treat them like they're heroes because they're the ones that are actually taking a real risk for their family, and from everybody else and living in poverty, dealing with that. That's a hero. Or the BG&E guy that comes during the damn hurricane and fixes your lines. That dude's a bit of a hero if you're going to put risk in the element. So I never felt a danger being a cop. The idea that we say that now is preposterous. And then on top of it, while we're saying this, it is the safest time in police in human history in a country that's still living in the era that's the safest time in human history. So it's the exact, I hear you say that, how sometimes like you listen to MSNBC or something, it's the flip-flop of reality.
Yes.
And it's the same rhetoric with policing. It's the exact opposite of the truth. The police have never been safer and never more in control and taking less risk than ever before. So if you don't take a risk, you're not a hero.
Right.
So my big saying when it comes to that is the hero is the one who hesitates to pull the trigger, not the one who actually does. Now, yes, you have heroes that do pull the trigger from time to time, but if you're going to stand back at objectively, that hesitation is what earned you the pride and respect of being a hero and getting that fancy funeral and getting half price at Chipotle and getting free passes to the movies or whatever, is that you took that risk and not that you failed to take that risk.
That's a great point, right? So if you're a cop and you're walking down the street and your first responsibility is your own safety, well, then you're just fucking like me. You're no better than me, right? You're supposed to be better than me. You're supposed to put the citizen first. That's what I always thought. You're supposed to, exactly what you said, you're supposed to risk your life. You're supposed to risk your own safety. That's why we're supposed to exalt you in our culture. But now they're not doing that, and we're still exalting them. And as you make the accurate point, it's a safer job than fisherman. A fisherman, more deadly. Then I've looked up these statistics.
There's a lot of jobs. I mean, it's in the teens, I think,
yes,
in danger.
It is. It's like number 13 or 14 as far as dangerous profession. I was a construction, much more dangerous than being a cop. So how do we get out of this? So now I just want to make the point too, like, because I don't want to go into the specifics. That really grosses me out. It bums me out. People can go to that Free Thought Project and see all those videos of all the police brutality. I'm going to play one video later. We're going to go over it, but it's the most recent one. But so just make the point. So it's not, just to drive it home, it's not individual cops. It's a culture, and it goes from coast to coast. And how would you best describe the culture?
Well, so when you're in it, so I am talking about a hyper-aggressive urban police department. That's what I am most familiar with. But the rural departments, let's not kid ourselves that they're ready to get black people way faster than we are in an urban agency if they had a chance to. the saying was, and I did it, was that there's only one gang in Baltimore, and it's the one that wears blue. So, like, that's what I would enforce as, like, why gang members in Baltimore, when my post, they couldn't flag their colors. So I would take their colors and punk them and you know, alert them that there was only one gang, and that was us.
Oh, really?
So
that's a real, like, hostile act, kind of like, I don't know, you're kind of like disrespecting them to the utmost, right?
Well, that's a thinking that I bought into for a while, was that you have to come and set a tone. You have to be the big man in the hood. So I would, like, find the gang members or the biggest dude around, and you punk them.
Really?
So you put yourself as the boss of the neighborhood and the one in control, not him.
Oh,
and you know, now I see the fallacy of that. The fallacy, I mean, I should be asking him what he needs me to do to help keep his neighborhood safe as well. Yeah, I see that now, but at the time, that's kind of what you're thinking, and because of that whole culture, there's a certain rational pathway to that if you don't analyze it. And as long as you keep it at that basic level of thinking, then it seems plausible when you don't dig.
So I've said, I think so these are, by the way, some of this stuff is actual comes from research, some of it's off the top of my head, like this. So I have another theory. There's another theory. I have what's wrong with policing today is that the people who police, like, I don't know any cops in my neighborhood. I don't know who they are. I don't know where they live. I'm guessing they live in Pasadena. I bet they don't. So when you go to, same thing, well, I mentioned at the top of this interview that most of the cops I know live in Simi Valley or Magic Mountain or whatever, and they drive into the city to go police other people. So they become an occupying force. So when you're asked to police people, you don't know who they are, you're not familiar with the neighborhood, you then look at everybody as the other, and you are now become an occupying force, and that just sets up horrible situations so the only time anybody ever comes in contact with you is after a crime has been committed, conflict, all that stuff. And not that that is a panacea, right? But I think that's a first step, right? Because what happens, I think, is that cops, when they live in Simi Valley or Magic Mountain and they drive into Watts or Compton or Hollywood or wherever they go, they don't see them as people. They don't see them as people just like them with problems. They see them as the other, right? Now, what do you say to that?
Well, you actually are conflicting yourself from an earlier position.
Am I? God damn it.
That you had when you talked about that in Chicago, they had to live there, but they live in enclaves.
Yes.
Right? So when you live in the enclave, you're no more in the city than you are as a regular resident. It's still like, if you can live in that Magic Mountain or you can live in an enclave, and you're still just as separated from the residents of Pasadena. So I don't buy into it as a tax-based other than a tax-based argument, because what you have to do is you have to set up metrics and incentives to have the people integrate. And so the saying that I'll say is the goal is the integration, not occupation. And how you integrate, like, I'm deeply integrated in Baltimore activism and things that are going on down there now in the community, despite the fact that I still live in Pennsylvania. And that's because I've taken a vested interest in the members of that community and learned from them on the daily. So it's about being a member of that society, not necessarily where you live, because you can be in the same city and be totally separated, especially in hyper-segregated city like Baltimore, where the people that live in the rich white neighborhoods, they are way more separated from that poor neighborhood that's 10 blocks away than poor white people in West Virginia are.
So you would say
it's a management problem. You have to incentivize your officers to be judged by how well they know you as a resident. So a supervisor and the command staff, they need to not praise their officers based upon how many people they put in cells. They need to praise their officers based upon how many leads they can get to solve a violent crime, how many neighbors they know. So if I want to know if they're doing a good job, I as a supervisor want to walk around this neighborhood, knock on your door, and know if you know who your officer is. And if you don't, then that's what I want to get on him.
Yeah, I don't know who my officer is. Do you know who our officer is?
Yes, I do.
What's his name?
Officer Perez.
Well, shout out to Officer Perez.
Shout out to Officer Perez.
That's right.
So, Michael, just want to clarify one more time. You don't think community policing is a good thing? So you don't. I mean, I think if my theory is if the cop lives in the neighborhood he's policing, then he knows that kid. It's like, well, I'm not going to go be a jerk to that guy. I know that guy's dad, or I know that guy's brother, or that kid, he's on the Little League team with my kid, or they know everybody kind of, that's the idea anyway.
It can
What's
work.
wrong with that idea?
It can work in maybe if we cleaned up other problems. But when you look at this model as we have it now, like I do push a community policing model. I mean, I push a community-led policing, which means I want the community actually in charge of the department. I want it to be a CEO to board type of relationship between the chief. I don't want like a mayor dictating. I want the actual citizens to dictate. But so here's what I know. If you were to draw a picture of what a Marine looks like or who you're going to pick to be a Marine and a cop, that's me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would not have busted my friends that I grew up with in my neighborhood. There was zero chance of that. So I think you're ripe for corruption when you still have poverty and you still have people fighting for resources and you still have the drug war being launched. I think it's a little too ripe for corruption in our current model. Without changing a lot of other things, I think we'll have problems.
So, do cops?
Well, let me add something to that real quick, just as an anecdotal thing. Freddie Gray, one of the members that were charged in participating in his killing, grew up 3 blocks from him. So it's a direct evidence that
doesn't really matter.
Right.
Okay, you win. Score 1 for the cop. So now, there's so many questions I want to ask you. Like one of them is, what have been the repercussions in your life because of this? Because of you coming out and telling the truth about the thing that kills me too is they call it the blue wall, right? So everybody hates gang members because they won't snitch, right? They're like, well, who doesn't tell? But the cops do the exact same thing. No one ever mentions that on the news, right? Isn't that weird?
Yeah, I mean, when somebody does, it gets silenced because a chief or an FBI director will act like it doesn't happen. The current chief of Chicago said he never saw misconduct in his 27 years of policing. And if that's not enough to terminate him, blatantly lying to the entire public, I don't know what is.
You would say, well, either you've had eye trouble or you're the shittiest detective in all of the country.
Or don't even understand the definition of misconduct, I suppose. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's the guy I want, the guy who doesn't see crime. I want him to be in charge of the crime. What are the solutions? What would you say is the solution? I mean, obviously we have to get rid of the drug war, right?
So the best thing to do, I think, to see some of my more solutions is for Chicago. When I applied for the chief job there, I had to do 38 pages worth of essays on what my reform models were, and I made that public. So that's at my website, michaelawoodjr.net, and you can see that. And I put everything on there: my qualifications, what I think it should be, the citations for why I think it should be that way. But the fundamental model, one reason I pushed getting money out of politics, is that really does drive what we're talking about.
Money in politics?
Right, is I don't think we can reform policing. Well, there's 2 ways I think we can reform policing. One is to get the money out of the politics, and you can do it slowly through actually having representation, and then we can change things like incentive. You can have a commissioner that doesn't actually incentivize his officers to lock up the citizens they're supposed to be serving. But my utopia idea is that I would get an agency, and what I want is civilians to lead the agency in a CEO to board type relationship. And if there's 7 members on this board that are picked by the public, 4 of those 7 have to be from the poorest neighborhoods in the area. So you have this perpetual model that constantly feeds itself, that whatever is good for the poorest among us is good for the richest among us. And as long the poorest people would then have the most influence, making the rich people be encouraged to make sure that they're more educated and making sound decisions because they're directly influencing the police department that's policing the rich area. Currently, the rich decide how the poor are policed. If we can flip that, I think we'd see a dramatic improvement, which obviously would immediately result in ending the war on drugs, at least in my neighborhood, because you're not going to tell me that 7 people are going to decide that a good way to go about business is that we lock up Susie's kid kid because he has a dime bag in his pocket. And that goes over to my overall theory of why policing is now affecting white people in brutality, is because you have that money and politics continually feeding the school to prison pipeline and filling up prison cells, and that power is this thing to praise, and that we have to put police up on this pedestal. So you've gotten that big, huge, in-depth us versus them. So now that the us versus them has been exposed in the poor black neighborhoods, they are now feeling more locked into the us versus them and are now more into a bubble and seeing more people as the enemy. So the factors of discrimination are expanding beyond being looking just like you to being anyone that's not wearing blue.
You know what? I think I lost that train of thought. So I did. I lost it. So so if I lost it, I'm sure other people will.
So I'll hash it over.
How did it go from them just being discriminatory towards people of color to whitey?
Because we have factors, and that goes into our society. So I think we have factors of discrimination that are implicit in us at all times. We all have a measure of racism in us.
Okay.
And that is because...
You know who has the most? Puerto Ricans. Anyway, go ahead.
So we grew up, we're a tribal creature, and we can only really recognize about 150 people as we kind of think of still remaining as our tribe. And those people are going to look like us and they're going to act like us.
Okay.
So in America, your big factors are being female or being a minority, black being worse than brown, and you have religion stuff. So Muslim is a big factor of discrimination. And now you're getting into one of the factors is those who stand against the police or cause problems with the police when you get into that us versus them. So if you're a black Muslim female who stands up against police brutality, then your odds of having something happen to you are dramatically higher than that white kid in Massachusetts, like Zachary Hammond, John Rawl in Baltimore. We can start naming white people who have been victims as much as we can. Black people, it's starting to escalate up. But now that that's a factor, that everyone is becoming the enemy, it's bleeding into even people that look like them.
So you're seeing police, urban police departments becoming even more tribal.
Yeah, I think all police departments are, because you have this rhetoric, like even James Comey.
Even James Comey, the FBI director.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of articles with me pushing back on that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, because it's patently false.
So let's tell people, James Comey is the FBI director. He's a Republican appointed by Barack Obama because, you know, Democrats always report fucking Republicans to everything. And it never happens in reverse. So he is now saying that, this is the truth, he's saying that cops aren't aggressively enforcing laws anymore or policing because they're afraid of citizens with cell phones are going to videotape them, and he's calling it the Ferguson Effect. He's saying that now cops are afraid to be videotaped and they're afraid to be called on doing things improperly, so now they're not doing things at all. And when asked for what evidence he based that on, he had zero evidence. So that's just some shit that he's asserting that he has nothing to back it up against or for. And you have pushed it back against that.
Yeah, I mean, I pushed back against that on multiple levels. Not alone, just alone the evidence. We can talk about that for a second. But what he's saying is that, okay, so I was a cop, and I know a lot of cops that are like me still out there in that department. And what he is saying is that because of a fucking camera, I'm too much of a bitch to do my job? Fuck you. You know, like, I don't understand why cops didn't see it that way. Like, I'm afraid of a camera? Are you kidding me? Why don't you come out here and police Baltimore, Mr. Comey? You know, so that's how my gut took it. But from an evidence perspective, I really fundamentally believe that crime has reduced in America despite policing, not because of policing. And we will see that in an area like in New York, when they decide to turn their back on de Blasio, then they stopped working. The crime rate went down.
So let's set it up. So what happened was if you remember, those cops were shot in New York City, right? One was an Asian cop. And they were murdered, right?
Right, ambushed and executed.
Ambushed and executed. The cops then blamed de Blasio's rhetoric, and they turned their backs on him at the funeral, and then they slowed down their policing. They weren't enforcing those street-level crimes anymore. And so you're saying...
And then the subsequent result was that crime went down.
So what the cops were expecting to happen was...
They were expecting crime to go up.
And that everyone would beg them to start policing again. But what happened?
It went down. So if you isolate the factors, so if it did... the police lack of activity did lead to crime, that would be universal. They act like these things are in bubbles. Well, if you do a policing program in Baltimore, that policing program will work in Chicago. I assure you, if it actually works, it may be working in Baltimore because of another factor that you're too ignorant to see. One thing I want to say about de Blasio and the officers that turned their back on them, I also would like people to go back and see that video to see the cops that didn't. And any cop that didn't turn their back on them, when I get an agency one point in time, they got an immediate job with me because that was fucking honorable that they stood up and didn't turn their back.
Well, it's just the irony of that was just, it's like talk about breaking the irony meter. It's like, oh, you guys are upset that you're not getting the respect. And so your response to that is to disrespect your boss.
Your boss actually being the citizens.
The citizens.
You decided that you weren't going to do what you promised to do.
Right.
So fuck the citizens because I feel disrespected.
Right.
And now when I say that, though a lot of cops do think that I'm like a traitor for saying that. But I mean, look yourself in the mirror and say that. Your decision was fuck the public and you call yourself a servant.
Yeah, I know. It's, again, most people... what do you would know more about from all the cops that I've known in my life, and it's a ton. I always say this: the next cop I meet who became a cop because he wanted to help people will be the first cop I ever met who became a cop because he wanted to help people. They become cops because they fucking dig it. If I was a cop and someone said, "Hey, there's a guy with a gun 2 blocks away," I would get in my car and drive the other way. But cops drive towards it, and that's where we're different, and that's why we need those kind of guys. That's what I'm saying. So I'm not totally against. I'm not an anti-cop in that sense. I'm anti-cop culture. Right? Like I said, a lot of cops very close to me. Some of my best friends in Chicago are cops, right? So this isn't that thing.
Well, it's that SWAT teams are for murder suspects, not marijuana dealers.
Right.
I mean, it's not rocket science.
So it's the culture and it needs to change from the top down. And, cops are like, they take on the personality of its leader, just like any organization, right? So we need to have politicians. This is what I think. I think we need to have politicians wake up to this fact and do that thing that you're talking about. Put the control of policing in the hands of the citizens.
But we have to have a mayor that will give up control. Because fundamentally, my paradigm means I want a mayor to give me the police department, and then subsequently what I'm going to do is give it to the people.
That'll never happen.
And that is a little too far ahead right now.
Let me guess. You're voting for Bernie Sanders?
Well, I guess I'm voting for Jill Stein now.
This guy's fairy tale. So I thought fairy dust. This guy was rainbows and unicorns and citizen policing.
I totally... it's only a matter of time, though.
You think?
So this is what I think
I think most people in power, super okay with how policing's going. No one gave a shit about Occupy Wall Street. No one cared that cops went out and cracked the heads of peaceful protesters at the behest of Wall Street. Frickin' everyone knows that they gave, Jamie Dimon gave the cops money. The cops, we know this, right?
But let me tell you this, though.
And Barack Obama did dick.
The biggest shock that you'll probably hear about ever since everything I've been doing for the last year is my email is flooded with young cops and young Marines and young officers who see it and they say, I still want to go into policing. What can I do? Or there are current cops who say, I see exactly what you're seeing, whether I'm in this Royal Department. And if something happens and you do get an agency, please let me know because I want to if I get a job in San Francisco or Oakland, I'm going to have hundreds of officers moving to work for me there, and people don't see that. But this movement, it has nothing to do with Bernie Sanders. He's a representation of it. We are coming, people like Cenk and you and me who are out there, we take these losses left and right. We get beat down, but we're just the front of this. The whole, everyone that's younger than me, they're behind and they're coming. And so as soon as somebody like me starts to get power, it's just going to be cascading, and you're going to see a progressive movement definitely take over. But the problem problem is that in that meantime, what we're talking about is people dying by state-sanctioned murder and oppressive governments. So we get frustrated as activists because that delay, while it will be successful and incremental and will be successful, on the other side of that equation is destroyed families. So this is why we're pushing the agenda to try and at least somehow wake everybody the fuck up so that we can do it a little bit sooner, because that could be your son or daughter. You're not immune being a white dude in Pasadena from your son being a victim of police brutality. So we have to fix it as soon as fucking possible.
Yeah, I agree. And so your idea, now you applied to be the chief of police in Chicago?
I did, and they clearly circumvented the system. I know I'm too far ahead for Chicago, but I want the ideas to be out there so they can't deny them.
And you're telling me Rahm Emanuel didn't pick you?
Yeah, I don't think he would have thought of me for a second.
That is such a shocker.
But San Francisco and Oakland are up next.
Yeah.
So,
and what do you now? Honestly,
I did think. I mean, look, if you were to pick a cop that would be the chief of San Francisco
you'd be
police,
you'd be my pick.
I mean, if there was one that was even going to look the stereotypical role.
Yes, but Michael, you know what was surprising to me is when you think of Seattle, right, as this liberal utopia, right, and all this stuff, and the Pacific Northwest, and it is a lot, and it's friendly to gays and all that stuff.
One of the most progressive police chiefs out there, believe it or not. So whatever you're going to say bad, understand it's also one of the most progressive departments there are.
I was just going to say that they're really progressive up there. But I started to maybe it's the sheriff then, because I remember
But it doesn't matter that the chief is extremely progressive. It still has to.
So there was, I think maybe it was the sheriff of in Seattle, the Seattle area. But I remember there was a couple of stories in a row about a year ago on the Young Turks, and I had thought that Seattle was like different, right? And it turns out then I started to look in. There was a lot of just like any other city.
But that's why I want to tell you, like, understand that's one of the most progressive departments. So any story you're telling there, rest assured, it's worse by far than most everywhere else.
Yeah. So that's just shocking to me that it happens everywhere, all over, and it makes me, you say that even white people now are even white people. That's how bad it is.
Yeah, think about that. Think of that. We have to actually utter that sentence in 2016 when we're being told that racism isn't the thing anymore.
And people who are attracted to policing, I know it. They say things like this, like, what was the word they used for black people in Baltimore? Because the cops in Chicago that I knew, they call them willies.
By time I was there, and I think maybe I was in a bubble as well for when we have a majority black department. So you have to remember that. And I think there is racism that's overt there, but I was totally against that. So that wouldn't have been done around me, especially when I was a boss. It was like, if that would have been, I know that exists, and I see it. You see it in like promotional processes, and you see it in the good old boy network. But at the ground level, again, these younger people aren't thinking that way. They have implicit biases that they don't understand that they have. They don't understand that they've been programmed to see black males as being bigger and being older than they are, or being more aggressive from TV and everything else that goes on with rhetoric. Seeing Muslims as dangerous when empirically right-wing radical Christians are dramatically more likely to create a terrorist attack in America. So that's who we should be focusing on if we were actually cared about it. So things like that get into their heads, and that contributes now to what they try to train this. But police have now said, oh, so what you mean is everybody is an equal threat. So instead of saying we should have treated black people and brown people like we treat white people, they're starting to think that, oh, yeah, everyone is a threat. So we have to treat white people like we do black and brown people. Which started to happen. I think,
so
it's another element. None of these things are in a vacuum.
Right. Mm-hmm. And the Occupy Wall Street thing, I seem to be the only person who ever mentions it. Am I making too much out of it? Because I was down there in L.A. when they went and cracked the heads. And by the way, all the departments got sued for it, and they all had to pay out money to people. And everybody's just okay with that. Yeah, I guess we fucked over some peaceful protesters.
And liberal hippies, though. I mean, that's what marijuana is.
It's bunch of
the
hippie,
same thing.
Right?
I mean, that's not, nothing changed there. So that was still the anti-marijuana demonization of hippies that they're still thems as well, just as much as the crack dealers are thems. That was the whole plan, right? So you silence the hippies and the progressives by making cannabis illegal, and you silence the blacks by making crack more illegal and focusing on it. But since we are talking about the crack thing real quick, just so we can clear up and everybody knows, is the harder sentencing for crack had nothing to do with it actually being crack. It was an unfortunate result of a well-intentioned policy, which was that they were targeting which level of dealer was a mid-level dealer. But in a poor black neighborhood, a mid-level dealer is a dramatically lower in the big scheme than a mid-level cocaine dealer is. So mid-level cocaine dealers would have 100 pounds, but a mid-level crack dealer would have this amount of pounds, and they weren't like thinking about it.
Oh, okay. It's okay. We can edit all this out, Michael.
Totally.
This is not like Joe. This is not like Joe Rogan. We edit.
No, we don't. There's no reason to edit anything.
We edit.
But see, the thing is people think I'm just some libertarian talking point, so they have to kind of see me as being human as well, so we can mess up.
Oh, okay.
Be
all
stupid
right.
and awkward, and
so
you do an awkward white handshake or something.
How does it go when you get pulled over?
Well,
do people know? Do the cops know who you are?
No, not generally. I mean, I've had cops recognize me. All the Baltimore cops know me, obviously.
And what happens?
My get out of jail free card still works just fine.
What? You're kidding me?
No, but I have seen cops act in completely inappropriate manners since then.
To you?
Yeah, but not knowing that it was me, not knowing that thinking that it wasn't someone like me, and I would scold them, and they would realize by that level of scolding that they were talking to somebody that wasn't going to let them get away with that. So I've certainly seen that side of it as well, with cops being aggressive now, more on the outside, but they don't really mess with me.
Really?
I'm still, to a certain extent with that ID card, I'm still one of them.
You still have like a cop ID
I'm
card?
retired, so I still have a gun and badge and ID.
Get the F. You're kidding. Well, good for you.